Okay, in the title page of all of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says that his mission is to explain one specific verse from the book of Deuteronomy, Dvarim, which is, "Behold, this matter is very near to you in your mouth and in your heart that you may do it." We don't encounter any direct address to this chapter, to this verse, until chapter 17. Because in order to understand why this requires a whole book and a whole new movement to completely transform the Jewish world and raise a lot of eyebrows and some skepticism and not a small amount of criticism, the Alter Rebbe has to spend 16 chapters of premise and preface so that we can understand why this seemingly innocuous verse is so complicated. And essentially, what the question on the verse is the pasuk ubel and in your heart, because as the Alter Rebbe lays out through the first 16 chapters, we probably will never be able to completely transform ourselves to only have love for Hashem. That's not within our control. I may always like fill in the blank, uh, laziness, self-indulgence. I may always get hungry on Yom Kippur. And as the Alter Rebbe clarifies, that's not a failure. It's a struggle, but it's not a failure. And therefore, we have to ask, how can we say that, behold, it is very near to you in your mouth and in your heart to do the mitzvahs? It doesn't feel that in my heart it's very near to me. In fact, quite the contrary. It feels like in my heart, I'm always going to have the struggle because I'm always going to have the attraction and distraction of impulse and so on. And so the Alter Rebbe explained in chapter 17 that by following the recommended routine, which is I use my intellect to imagine, that's the word I like, my chachma, to go outside of my own purview, that life is not just the patch of grass that's staring me in the face like an animal that walks on all fours, but I have the ability to see the infinite expanse of the sky, the infinity of Hashem. This will lead me to a desire to be associated with Hashem. That's what we mean by love Hashem. Not necessarily that I love it like it's my favorite thing to do, but I long to be connected with it, which will inspire my heart to have enough love for Hashem, la soisoi, to get the job done. So I think it, I feel it enough to get the job done. It's true. I may still like sitting on the couch, but through following this process, I will get up and go and do whatever the mitzvah activity that is called upon in that moment. That was in chapter 17. In chapter 18, the Alter Rebbe said, well, what am I supposed to do until I master that? What am I supposed to do, so to speak, in the meantime, before I have mastered the think it to the point that it inspires my heart? I need something a little bit more immediate. And so the Alter Rebbe introduced us to what we are describing as the short, long way, but it's still a way. It's still possible, which is to simply stir up, go right to the desirous side, what we call the emotional side, not in the sense of emotional that I get so excited or I get weepy and so on, but the idea that I should be driven to be close to Hashem. And how do I do that? Well, in chapter 19, or really starting in 20, and all the way up through 24, and this week we're going to start 25, the Alter Rebbe starts to lay out the awareness that every time we do a mitzvah, we are affirming the oneness of Hashem, as is described in the first of the Ten Commandments. And any time we, God forbid, violate one of those prohibitions, we are, in a sense, violating the second commandment, which is, thou shalt have no other gods before me. So every mitzvah act is an affirmation of God, of God's oneness, not just of God's existence, but of God's oneness. And every restraint from violation is a restraint from a form of service of other, avodah zara, service of anything other than the infinity of Hashem. And lest we think, well, the mitzvahs are simply instructions that God has given us so that we behave ourselves. And it's all about some sort of cost-benefit analysis as to what are the risks and the rewards of how mitzvah observance will make my life more or less pleasant. the Alter Rebbe starts to remind us in chapters 21 and 22 that the mitzvahs are actually the expression of Hashem himself. And there the Alter Rebbe uses the analogy of speech, that just like a person can infinitely speak, and yet his words, or I should say not just like, but in contrast to a person who they have the power of speech and no one word diminishes their capacity for speech. Yes, their mechanics may run out. That is, I get a sore throat or laryngitis, but my capacity for speech is not diminished by the spoken word. Similarly, when Hashem, who created the entire universe through speech, is not in any way diminished by it. It's not something separate. I mean, if I have 10 marbles and I give you a marble, I have 9 marbles. But if I share words, I am not diminished, and the words are not separated from me. And we pointed out that this is perhaps more analogous to human thought. If I think something, it's there. I stop thinking, it's gone. In order for it to continue to exist, I have to continuously think about it. If I think about a shape in my mind, the shape is there. If I stop thinking about it, the shape leaves. Similarly, creation is Hashem's consistent and constant focused attention. So God didn't just create the world 57, 86 plus years ago. Hashem is creating the world at every moment, because if he wasn't, it would cease to exist. And therefore, at every moment, I am essentially either affirming the oneness of Hashem, again, not just the existence of Hashem, that's a given. I'm either affirming the oneness of Hashem, or I am, God forbid, denying the oneness of Hashem. And so the Alter Rebbe said that just like no Jew would ever consciously deny the oneness of Hashem, even if, God forbid, they put the sword to his throat, he would never deny the oneness of Hashem. Well, anytime a Jew, God forbid, does an Aveira, that's essentially what he's doing. He is denying the oneness of Hashem. He is denying the oneness of Hashem. And if we had that awareness, we would never do an Aveira. Well, of course, the animal soul comes back with the, oh, come on. That seems to be a little exaggerated. And they say, I can prove to you that it's an exaggeration, because we know that in the penalty phase of sins, there is a pecking order of sins that carry a more severe penalty or a less severe penalty. So it's not this idea that every sin is identical. Well, the Alter Rebbe rejected that, and he illustrated this point, that we do find that some sins carry a harsher penalty, but in other areas they carry a lesser degree of being ostracized, whatever the word is, from the community, such as disqualifying somebody from being a shochet, but it may carry a harsher penalty. So this idea that we can right size which aveiros are really bad and which ones are not so bad is a trick of the Nefesh HaBahamis. If so, how is it possible that people sin? You got to unmute. If so, how is it possible? Yeah.
Okay. For some reason, I'm not getting why it affirms or disaffirms the oneness of Hashem. I understand that if you don't follow the Torah, you're ignoring Hashem's will, but I'm not connecting with the oneness.
Okay, because we're saying that unlike a person who maybe I tell you that this is what I'd like, but it's not the essence of my existence, creation is the essence of Hashem's existence. So when Hashem says, I want you to eat matzah or shake the lulav or light Shabbos candles, this is truly who Hashem is. As we said, it is like the limbs of his very being. So it's not just something that Hashem gives us to do because it benefits us, although we would argue that, of course, it does. But the mitzvahs are done because of how they benefit Hashem, not just because of how they benefit us. Because if it benefits me, then I said, again, it's some sort of cost-benefit analysis. How much do I really want that? And I save it up, and I can start to negotiate. But when it's for the service of Hashem, then there is no negotiation. What then is it that allows a person to sin? Well, unfortunately, there's an answer. And that answer, the Alter Rebbe reminds us, is a Gemara in the volume called Saita, which speaks about a woman who blatantly defies a literal court order that she not seclude herself with this suspicious man, which she shouldn't do anyway. And it's gotten so to such a degree that her husband had taken to court, and she has an explicit court order, and she defied it. And we say, "What are you doing?" And her answer is some sort of justification, because, as the Talmud says, nobody would ever sin, whatever the sin is, unless they were invaded by a spirit, non-substantive, of foolishness. It's never a sound idea to sin. It's always a foolish idea. What is the foolishness? Well, it takes one of two forms. Either it minimizes the impact of the sin, or it minimizes me. It's not so bad, everybody does it, etc. Or I'm not so holy anyway. I'm not such a holy person. I'm not so concerned. I'm not so holy. And so the Alter Rebbe, with not just in some sort of shock therapy, but he reminds us, yeah, it is really that bad. Yes, it is really a severance of my relationship with Hashem. Yes, it's true that I can do tshuva, which we'll talk about here. Yes, of course. And the test case is that, again, if they, God forbid, put the sword to the person's throat and they said, surrender your relationship with Hashem, even to pretend, we are making the argument that even the most disinterested of parties who says that his Yiddishkeit is meaningless, they don't exercise it in any conscious way, it's only because all along they are able to fool themselves. But at that moment, they say, no, I would never do that. I'm not going to deny my Jewish identity. And to use an analogy, and it's pardon me that it's sensitive, but a person eats junk food, smokes cigarettes. We say, isn't that bad for you? Oh, it's fine. So why don't you just shoot yourself in the head? Well, that I won't do. I mean, again, I don't mean to be callous about it. Why? Because they think the cigarette's not going to hurt me, the potato chips are not going to hurt me, the reckless driving is not going to hurt me, etc. But if we would realize the impact, we would be just as resilient as if they put the sword to our throat and said, deny your relationship with Hashem, because in that circumstance, we'd have no capacity to fool ourselves into thinking anything other than we are disrupting and severing our relationship with Hashem. So here in chapter 25, we are coming to a summary of this strategy point by revisiting the pasuk Ki Karev and seeing how it plugs in to this strategy. Remember, the original strategy, the sort of primary strategy, is engage the intellect to recognize that there is something greater than yourself that you long to be connected with. This will inspire your heart, that will result in changed behavior. In chapter 18, and that's what Ki Karev means. And then we went on to say that, well, what am I supposed to do in the interim? And we explained that in the interim, I'm supposed to engage the character, what we call the emotions, the midos, to be uplifted and inspired in the service of, in the longing of, to being connected with Hashem. And that will get us over the hump. So how does that, and how do we do that? By recognizing the impact of every mitzvah, which is an affirmation of the oneness of Hashem, and the severance from my relationship with Hashem in the moment through the violation of any avera. And this idea of magnitude, well, this one is big, and this is a trick of the Nefesh HaBahamis. And again, we know this just at a personal level, because, of course, on one level, we would say, well, there's a big difference between somebody who doesn't say good morning to me and somebody who steals my lunch. But on the other hand, there's a certain common theme there that they have completely annulled my identity and my existence by ignoring my being and my sense of self in that circumstance or that capacity. Okay. So here we go. The chapter 25 begins. And now we can again revisit this pasuk. We now are, for this strategy, the second strategy, the long short way, we are able to revisit the pasuk and find some new depth of understanding that is different than the way we understood it in the what I'm going to call the recommended procedure. And this just another reminder of how the Alter Rebbe wrote Tanya as a salve for people who were feeling disconnected from Hashem. So we try our recommended. That doesn't work. We're going to try round two. We're trying to come up with some way that everybody can find themselves connected with Hashem. And I guess nothing new under the sun. There is still people at that time saying, "Yeah, this won't work for me. This won't work for me." And again, a person can say that indefinitely and always say, this won't work, this won't work, this won't work. At some point, something here has got to work. Okay, so again, we go back to the pasuk, which reads, "Behold, the matter is very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart, that you may do it." That's the verse. And our question is, as the Alter Rebbe phrases it back in chapter 17, sincerely one of my favorite quotes from Tanya, our experience suggests otherwise. Or, as we might say, nuh-uh. It certainly doesn't seem that way, that it's so very near to me in my mouth and in my heart that I may do it. It actually feels quite distant from me and quite unnatural and quite almost insurmountable. So what do you mean? Behold, it is very near to you in your mouth and in your heart that you may do it. So here the Alter Rebbe comes back and he says, Shebechol eis ubechol shah, that at literally every moment, meaning at every circumstance. So here the Alter Rebbe uses two words, and they're not for drama or poetry. That means under every circumstance, even if they're dangling the most delicious of distractions in front of my eyes, and at every moment, even when I'm not feeling my strongest, most godly, as you recall, the Alter Rebbe explained back in chapter, I think, 14, I'm not good at remembering, maybe it was 13, about the itim mizumanim, the times when even the Beinoni, whose life is about the struggle, gets that boost because he's davening, or that's just one example, where he doesn't even feel any distraction from his relationship with Hashem. Well, even if he's not experiencing that, and he's, as we would say, come back down to earth, and he says, but how can you expect me on an ordinary weekday when I'm not surrounded by holiness and stimuli that are uplifting, or they're dangling this distraction in front of my eyes? And yet the Alter Rebbe says, Biyodai, it's in his hand. And this is really illustrative of the crucial point. The Alter Rebbe is very much focused on the struggler to tell him the absolute crucial is what you do. Now, what you do includes not only your physical behaviors, it also includes what you say and what you willfully, and this is the crucial point, what you willfully think about. Not maybe what passes through your field of vision, what you willfully think about. So when he says biyodai, which is a common Talmudic phrase to mean it's within your authority. It doesn't mean only literally within your hand. It means it's within your authority. Here, the focus is really on the behavioral in contrast to the character. And again, the Alter Rebbe has said that it's quite possible that the aspiring Beinoni will always find some struggle. And it will never get totally easy, though it gets easier. But struggling is not failure, and it's not a reason to say, look, I've been at this for 2 minutes, 2 years, 2 decades, whatever it is, and it's just not for me, I give up, which is a classic strategy of the Nefesh HaBahamis. Shel Adam, and again, it uses the word Adam, and this is significant, even though in these chapters, we're making an appeal directly to what we call the emotions or the character. But we're not forgetting that we are Adam. Adam is the Aleph over the Dam, the oneness of Hashem that overrides the Dam, which is the biological. The Aleph overrides the Dam, which is the biological. That's the crucial point. The Aleph overrides the Dam, which is the biological. We are not simply creatures of impulse, incapable of restraining ourselves from acting. That is the distinction between a human being and an animal. We're not just the next step up in the evolutionary process that an animal has to eat grass, but we have intellect so we can make nicer indulgences. The idea is our capacity to get beyond ourselves. Uber shusai, and it's within his authority. I may want very much to play the piano or, I don't know, climb Mount Everest, but it may not be within my capacity. So just the fact that I want it, and I may even be willing to devote myself, it's just not within my capacity to be musical or whatever. But here in our relationship with Hashem, there's no such thing that I can't do it. It may be true that I won't only find love for Hashem, but again, our basic premise is every Jew longs to be connected with Hashem. It is simply in our standard issued identity of our godly soul, just like every child longs to be connected with their parent, even if, God forbid, they had a bad experience, they still long for that. And in nature, everything is aligned with its origin. Well, our origin is Hashem himself. Lahavia ruach shtus, to dismiss the ruach shtus. That is, left alone, we have a natural desire to be associated with Hashem. That is the intuitive way we come out of the factory. What happens? We get invaded by the ruach shtus. Just like, fill in the blank. I never knew that I wanted it until I saw my neighbor had it. Now all of a sudden I want it. I mean, this is essentially the story of the first sin. God tells Adam, here you have the most beautiful garden. There's nothing you ever want for. The snake comes along and says, your neighbor has something that you don't have. There's something you're not allowed to have. And now all of a sudden it is exciting. That is, it stimulates this taiva, this impulse that I never otherwise would have had. And that's the ruach shtus. But it's an external. Remember the quote from the Talmud, nobody sins unless they are invaded by this ruach shtus. It enters us externally. Our mission is to put up the fence and prevent it. Vashichacha, and the forgetting. What do we forget? I don't know, I forgot. What do we forget? We forget that we intuitively want to be aligned with the infinity of Hashem. That is what we want. Just like nobody wants to be sick. But what happens? We get the donuts in our eyes and we eat it. And then, I shouldn't have eaten the donut. If we would remember how the donut made us sick the last time, we wouldn't eat it. But we forget. Willfully, or it'll be different this time. Mikir by from within you. Because remember, it's nichnas by ruach shtus. That ruach shtus, which again, ruach meaning non-substantive, and shtus means ultimately it's foolish. But in the moment, it seems like a good idea. It presents itself as a rational idea. We have the capacity to prevent it, to put up a blockade, and never let it to invade us. Ula oirer, and what should we do? We should arouse, reawaken, ahavosai laHashem echad, the love we have to Hashem echad. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. I just want to finish the sentence. Hamusuteres bevadai bilvavai belishum safek, which is hidden deep within that heart, absolutely without any doubt. Now that is a crucial point. Again, the premise of the Alter Rebbe is that, as we said in chapter 2 of Tanya, that a Jew has a nefesh hashenis, a second soul. That is, we are not just an animated entity that has its distinctive human capacities. Birds fly, fish swim, humans think. That level itself would still ultimately be driven by the common aspiration of all existence, which is self-perpetuation. What does everything want more than anything? To continue to be. That's what it wants. And there is no thing that it would ever tolerate to give up its thing. So even if it says, I would give my life for my family, it's still about my choice, about what I want. I regret I have but one life to give to my country. It's still about making that, again, what I'm calling the cost-benefit analysis. A Jew has a whole separate spiritual identity, and that's not the product of mitzvah actions. It's not the product of the desire for Torah and mitzvahs. It simply is intuitive that they have this actual spark of Hashem. And that actual spark of Hashem is absolutely there, even if he doesn't know it. And this is the classic message of Chabad. Excuse me, are you Jewish? Is not just an identification of your behavior. It is itself a kickstart for a characteristic that is otherwise trapped deep within the person. Now, the Alter Rebbe says that he loves Hashem Echad. Lashem Echad. Now, again, every word here is precise. Why does the Alter Rebbe have to say Hashem Echad? Obviously, God is one. That, by definition, has to be true. Because if there was more than one God, then what is the power that is stopping Hashem? So why does the Alter Rebbe have to add that line, meaning that word? Meaning, let's imagine we take it out, that he should remember and stimulate his love for God that is hidden in his heart. Why Hashem Echad? Because, as we have talked about in the last two chapters in particular, there is a profound distinction between believing that God exists, what we would call emunah in the mitzias of Hashem, in the existence of Hashem, and the emunah, the awareness, the belief, however we translate that, of the achdus Hashem. That is, Hashem is one, not like Hashem is one, like there's one pencil on the table, but that Hashem is one with everything of existence. Meaning, if a person says, and you remember my analogy, I believe you that there's a planet called Jupiter. I may even believe you that somehow that planet's orbit affects my life. But it's not something I am aware of when I'm eating breakfast. It's not something that I'm aware of in my ordinary life. Yes, do you know what would happen if there wasn't Jupiter? Okay, I believe you that the tides would be different and so on. But it's not a oneness. It's just a belief in the existence. So the Alter Rebbe is reminding us that Emunah in Hashem is the Emunah in the oneness of Hashem, that Hashem is one with all of existence. And again, not just one, like there's one book on the table, but the oneness of the infinity of Hashem. And that is absolute without suffix. Now, why does the Alter Rebbe have to double down and say it's absolutely true without suffix? Because it is true to my existence. Meaning, if you tell me that 2 + 2 = 4, I say I am certain that 2 + 2 = 4. Could I imagine that there could be some universe where 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4? I could imagine it. I don't know what it is, but it's possible that it could exist, and maybe you have some sort of mind trick, or maybe the mere fact that you're suggesting it to me is already a mind trick. So I'm going, okay, 2 + 2 doesn't have to. I believe it, but it's not without any doubt. Here, the reason why we are arguing that, or the Alter Rebbe is not, that's the wrong word, why the Alter Rebbe is laying it out as an absolute, it's not an argument. The Alter Rebbe is laying out as an absolute that Hashem exists, and every Jew is aware of this, is because it is innate to our awareness. Now people say, nah, yaha, well, I don't believe in God, I do believe in God, and round we go. Well, one illustration of this, one test case is, if you tell the person, well, you're not even Jewish, I mean, you don't do anything, they get appropriately, correctly, quite offended. I am absolutely Jewish. Well, you don't do anything Jewish, that doesn't mean I'm not Jewish. And they're absolutely right. So this is irrational. I mean, if you told me that I'm not, I don't know, figure it out, a great poet, I would say, well, okay, I'm not. Well, I am. Well, what poetry? Well, I guess I'd have to acknowledge that I'm not a poet because I've never written poetry, or whatever silly an example you'd want to give. So why does the Jew absolutely insist on their Jewish identity, even if they're not commonly accessing it? Because they know that it's absolutely true. It is true to the very identity of their existence. So it's not the product of some persuasion or argument. That was in the speech I made before. It's not an argument. It's not like, I convinced you. People say, how can you prove to me that God exists? Hashem is. That is the premise. That is the existence. That is what we mean, vadai beli shum suffix. It's not the product of some argument that I've made, that I defeated you, I sort of debated you into it, and now you have to acknowledge that without Jupiter, we wouldn't have high tide, whatever it is. So the Alter Rebbe continued, and now we can start to understand what it means when it says Ul bil vavcha. You recognize this; it's part of the Shema. V'afta es Hashem Ul bil vavcha, in your hearts. Now it's a little bit of an odd phrase. The word for heart is leib. Your heart, libecha. What does it mean? Bil vavcha, you should love Hashem in your hearts. And this includes reverence as well. Today, it's, I think, a little bit more obviously, and it's very much a buzzword appropriately, that love has to include what we commonly refer to as respect. Love has to include what we commonly refer to as respect. Without respect, love withers. Without respect, love will die. So there has to be respect. Respect is yira. Yira doesn't mean I'm afraid that you're going to punch me in the nose. It means that I recognize, and here we're talking about with the infinity of Hashem, I recognize that while Hashem, I long to be close, we're not chummy. And that's that very delicate balance where we can't we should not be buddy, chummy with the infinity of Hashem. Rather, we need to be reverent with Hashem. We need to revere God and not be, like I'm calling it, too casual or palsy-walsy with Hashem. We need to revere Hashem. And that's why the healthy love includes the chilul. Now, of course, we know that we prefer to focus very much on the ahavta es Hashem alekecha. You should love the Lord your God. We're very big into that. Well, there's another pasuk. It says, es Hashem alekecha tira. God, your God, you should revere. What about that? So we say, yes, the way to come to reverence for Hashem is by having proper love for Hashem. A proper love for Hashem will result in proper yira for Hashem. We have a pasuk that says, sur meira, avoid evil, va'asei tov, and do good. So we might think, well, based on this, we should stand on the street corners and say, excuse me, are you Jewish? Yes. Don't do Averas. Why are we skipping right to the Asay Tov? Why are we skipping right to the do good? And our explanation is that we are going to make the argument that when we are consumed, like obsessed, or whatever the word is, with doing good, that itself will crowd out the doing bad. Meaning, how will we avoid evil? By being connected to Hashem. The more I am aware of my connection with Hashem, the less I am distracted by a desire to be connected with anything other than the infinity of Hashem. The Hainu, that means that a person has a sense of fear, not fear like I'm going to be punished, but it itself is the fear of being detached from the infinity of Hashem. Now, what detaches us from the infinity of Hashem? As the Alter Rebbe has established over the last, particularly 3 chapters, any violation of Hashem. Like we talked about, that the second commandment, which is the prohibition against idolatry, is violated by any detachment from Hashem. But, oh, come on, this isn't such a big deal. And since when I am cognizant of this, when that is clear to me, then I will avoid that Avera, even if it's really, really delicious. Because I recognize the consequence that it will detach me from Hashem. Afilu b'mesiras nefesh mamish, even if it requires literal mesiras nefesh. Meaning, even if, God forbid, they put the sword to his throat, and the great drama, as we talked about, is one mechanism or one aspect of how a person would go to his death rather than even pretend to deny their relationship with Hashem. But what if it's not something that's so dramatic? What if it's just a little bit of indulgence? It's just a little bit of brushing around the edges. Come on, is that so bad? I'll fix it tomorrow. Well, if we would recognize how, like the cell phone, we're on and get disconnected, you're disconnected. Yes, it's true I can call back, but it's frustrating in the moment. In that moment, my disconnect from Hashem is genuine. It's not just the great moments of drama. And why would he have Mesiras Nefesh? It's not been part of his life activity. It's not something that is in the top 5 things that through which he identifies himself. And again, the test cases just tell him, well, you're not even Jewish. He gets very insulted, correctly. But why does he get so insulted? Again, quote unquote, he doesn't care about it at all. It's not meaningful in any of his life decisions because he knows in his essence that that is truly who he is. He just knows it intuitively. And I told you the story 20 times about the guy who wrote the book about why America would be better off returning to its Christian root. Why don't you? Because I'm a Jew. And every Jew understands what he means. As ridiculous as it sounds, every Jew intuitively understands. Yeah, of course, right. Everybody understands that. It's not because you explained it to him. You know why you want to put on tefillin? Because you're a Jew. But I'm not religious, and I'm busy, and this and that, and so on and so forth. It's not meaningful to me. It's not important to me, etc., etc. It's not because we talked him into it. It's not because he read in a book and the light went off. It's simply the truth of who he is. El lebeteva eliki. That is simply his natural proclivity. Just as a person naturally protects themselves without thinking about it, their reflexes put their hands up to protect themselves because they don't want to be physically harmed. Similarly, their natural desire is to protect their relationship with Hashem. Na'ah, yaha, na'ah. This is the Alter Rebbe's essential point. I feel him a very kal shel divrei seifrim shloi lavo ritzon yisbarach miach shenifred ba michuda v'achdusay kamay v'avodah zara mamish b'shas ma'isa. Now, this, if he's willing to give up his life, it's like the old joke, everybody wants to change the world, but nobody wants to change a light bulb. Right? Everybody has got, great aspirations. And the stories that I've told you, Rabbi, I would, if somebody said something anti-Semitic, I'd punch him in the nose, and I don't care if I go to jail. Will you put on tefillin? And I got no time for that. So if a person would be willing to have mamish mesiras nefesh, that is literally surrender their very life, why won't they give up cheeseburgers? Why won't they give up some taiva that's passing for a moment? It's a moment. Why? And the only reason is because of the ruach shtus, the spirit of foolishness that says, well, that's not such a bad thing. But if we understood how we are absolutely tethered into the infinity of Hashem, if we understood that Hashem is not just over there where, don't bother me. And as Hashem says, make me a sanctuary and I'll dwell amongst them. Can't you just live there? I mean, I don't want you to get lost. We treat Hashem like a pesky little brother. Like, don't follow me around. I mean, don't get lost. I want you to be here when I need you. And here's a quarter or a dollar. Now, don't bother me, but don't get lost. But don't follow me. I don't want you to see me where I am. I want you to stay over there. Well, Hashem wants to be aligned with us entirely and completely. So any Aveira, if we understood the true impact of that Aveira, we wouldn't do it. Why do we? Because we don't understand it. You'll argue that it's just a light one, or it's only rabbinic. Now, this touches on a very important idea. It's a little bit of a technical point, but worth talking about. The Alter Rebbe says here that our capacity to literally, God forbid, go to our death rather than deny God can be applied to any form of Aveira. Even if it's something that is ordinarily easily dismissed, Aveira Kala, it's light, it's easily pushed aside. And if it's of Divrei Soifrim. Now, the words Divrei Soifrim translate as the words of the writers, W-R-I-T-E-R-S, to write. And it's a reference to rabbinic prohibitions. So here we have to start to understand. We can recognize, based on what the Alter Rebbe has said, that if a person, God forbid, violates one of the 365 prohibitions, in that moment they're saying, don't tell me what to do. I'm going to do what I want to do. And in that moment, they have severed their relationship with Hashem. But why is that the case if they violate one of the rabbinic commands? Meaning, the rabbinic command is not Hashem's absolute alignment, we would think. So Hashem said, do not eat meat and milk. Don't cook a kid in its mother's milk, from whence we deduce that it's only lactating mammals whose flesh cannot be eaten in milk. And since fowl can't be cooked in their mother's milk because their mothers don't produce milk, that's allowed. Came along the rabbis and said, hey, you know what? Let's not get right up there to the edge. Let's build in a little bit of a shoulder here, and then we'll be cautious, and so on. So don't even eat fowl and milk. Don't even eat fowl and milk because it's getting a little close. Now, let's say, God forbid, somebody decides, well, I'm going to eat fowl and milk. How is it that we can make take the position that by doing so, he is in violation of the infinity of Hashem? This is only a precaution. This isn't the issue. This is just to protect the issue. So here the Alter Rebbe alludes to it, and we've seen this before, by referring to this as Divrei Soifrim, which gives us an insight and an understanding into what we generally refer to as rabbinic prohibition. Rabbinic prohibition doesn't mean just, some rabbi. This is what we talk about, the 7 rabbinic mitzvahs, Shabbos candles, Hanukkah candles, Eruv Tavshilin, Purim, Hanukkah, making brachas before eating. Some of the most popular mitzvahs are really rabbinic mitzvahs that we do. All of those that I just listed are ones that you recognize that we all do. And there's, of course, many of the mitzvahs that are only for Kohanim and so on and so forth. By using the term Divrei Soifrim, the words of the writers, and not just the Divrei Rabbanon, the words of the rabbis, the Alter Rebbe is alerting us to what we mean when we say that the Rabbanon prohibited something like chicken and milk or obligated us to light Shabbos candles, whatever it is. It's as if they are rewriting the very essence of our identity. So there was a time when a person could eat chicken and milk and it didn't violate God's will. But like things mutate, and therefore there needs to be an adjustment to that mutation, well, as the world gets darker, the Rabbanan came along and said, we have seen how it's been rewritten into the DNA. I mean, I don't know if that's a perfect analogy, but into the fabric of our relationship with Hashem. So it's not just that the Rabbanan are telling you that since you're not allowed to eat beef and milk, and therefore we're afraid that you might brush up against it. So we put in a buffer of chicken and milk. They're saying that chicken and milk now carries a characteristic of violating the infinity of Hashem, like we have rewritten the code. So this is that idea. And this is where we get, and it's a little bit more technical than we need to explore right now, the difference between a rabbinic mitzvah, a rabbinic takana, that is an instituted law, even ones that they've repealed, and custom and communal practice, and so on. Just to throw one out there to give you a taste of it, there's an interesting halacha about working on Tisha B'Av. Now, Tisha B'Av, of course, is not Yontif, and it's permissible to do, I'm talking about working like your job, not turning the lights on, like we think about it on Shabbos. Is it permissible to go to work on Tisha B'Av? So the Gemara says that different communities have different minhagim. What if I come from a community where it's the minhag not to work, but I happen to be Tisha B'Av in a community? Now, again, this doesn't really apply in our world because we don't have such rigid communities and so on. But then he happens to be spending Tisha B'Av in a community where it is the custom to work. He is not only permitted, he is perhaps even obligated to work so as to not separate himself from the community. So we see that here the Rabbanan put in a takana, which is different than a mitzvah, which is different than a minhag. They're all important, and again, it's a little bit more complex. Click here for more information. It's not directly the idea, but this is what the Alter Rebbe is telling us. That's why even for Divrei Soifrim, even for rabbinic prohibitions, the person is willing to give up his life, not even to eat milk and chicken, which isn't even in the Torah. Again, as we have explained it. Why? What is the logic? Not because he's going to go in the down elevator, and not because he's going to feel guilty, and not because all the kids are going to make fun of him and no one's going to want to marry his children, etc., etc. Why? Because all of those, you have an argument and a counter argument. Why? Because then it is as detaching and as separating and as violently violating his relationship, his singularity with the infinity of Hashem, no different than bowing down to idolatry. Why? Because as we mentioned in the second commandment, do not have other gods before me. What are other gods? Any power or authority to which I am loyal other than Hashem. So what is that? My hunger, my irritation, my impatience. That's what all I want to sit at the table with the cool kids, whatever it is. That is a service of something other than the infinity of Hashem. B'shas Maisa at that moment. Now, of course, the argument is the Nebuchadnezzar Bahama is not giving up. He is basically a form of, oh, come on. Oh, come on. That seems a little melodramatic. If for one moment, so I'll do tshuva tomorrow. Okay, so I'm 5 minutes late. So I'll fix it tomorrow. So if fix it tomorrow is a sufficient enabler for me to violate, the Alter Rebbe says, you can even do tshuva for avodah zarah. Hashem, as we see it, it's coming up in the parshas. We worship the golden calf. When you're a couple of weeks after splitting of the sea and revelation at Sinai, and you have a bad day, that's a bad day to have a bad day. And that was a really bad day. And yet, we did tshuva. So if you're saying, well, some things are irreparable. Nothing is irreparable, Enough ketchup and you can fix anything. Nothing is irreparable. Yet, a person, again, this is our premise, would absolutely reject avodah zarah. So again, what's the difference? Hopefully not, but I can only imagine that everybody, unfortunately, has probably had the experience where somebody has been very rude to them and somebody has been mildly rude to them. Well, you know what? At some essential level, it's really the same. In that moment when they sort of disregard me and they say, well, I can show up 5 minutes late because either I don't care that much about the person or I can take advantage of their generosity of spirit, and I know that they're going to tolerate my disregard of them, and hopefully not, but maybe you've encountered a person who constantly is testing how much can I get away with in this relationship? How much can I disregard, disrespect your stature, and you're still going to be my friend? Well, not us, of course, but this is what people can do with Hashem. Oh, come on, Hashem won't mind. And if we would be aware of it in that moment, and again, this argument, well, I'll fix it tomorrow, is not going to work. Why? Because you could fix avodah zarah tomorrow too, just like we had with the Egel Azav, just like we had with the golden calf. We fixed it. We built the Mishkan. Hashem rested amongst us. We fixed it, but we kind of didn't fix it because when the spy story happened, Hashem said, the same story we had before. It's that there is a residue, there is a wearing down of the relationship. So the fact that, quote unquote, I can fix it is not going to be an enabler for idolatry. It shouldn't be an enabler for fill in the blank, whatever the Avera is. Now, you'll argue, must speak and say, oh, come on. You can't really expect me to believe that. And I'll bring you a halachic validation to my counter argument. Because the Talmud says that if a person says, I'll sin, but I'll fix it tomorrow. Echta, I'll sin, ve'eshuv, and then I'll do tshuva. So the Talmud says he can't do tshuva. The Alter Rebbe says, no. It doesn't say he can't do tshuva. He says it's not, and again, I don't know how to exactly translate ein maspikin. It's not likely that he'll do tshuva. It's not granted to him that he'll do tshuva. Generally speaking, we're very much into giving people a second chance and even a 227th chance. And when a person wants to do tshuva, we're very much into, okay, how can we help you and what's the easiest way and how can we grease the wheels? But echta ve'eshuv, where the person says that the tshuva is going to permit me to do the avera, we're not so generous with that because now you're abusing tshuva, so we're not giving out tshuva so simply. But if you keep insisting on it, you can. That means not that it is impossible to do tshuva, it's just less likely. And you're not going to get all the assistance to do tshuva. You're going to have to really, really earn it. But you could earn it. And yet the argument is, again, that that's not going to enable the person or permit the person to do idolatry. They're going to stand strong at that moment. But tell them, look, tomorrow you'll make it up. Tomorrow you'll say, I'm sorry. But again, at that level, it's so clear to the person that that is such a violation from Hashem. And again, it's not because, well, then what's going to happen? Well, what are you going to do about it? What's going to happen to me? That's not the point. The point is in that moment, he has completely severed his relationship with Hashem. Yeah, you could fix it tomorrow. Again, golden calf, we fixed it. That doesn't mean that we look back and go, yeah, that wasn't so bad. That golden calf wasn't so bad because you see, we fixed it. It worked out in the end. I mean, if you've ever had that experience with someone, well, it's not so bad. It's not for you to say it's not so bad. It's not so bad. We stitched them up. It's not so bad. That's not for you to say. That's not their call to make. And a person understands that intuitively. Nobody says, yeah, that golden calf thing, we're really proud of that. We're not proud of it. We fixed it, but we're not proud of it. So why? You could do tshuva because we understand intuitively that we're not going to do that. And again, you could do tshuva for it. If you really push it and so on, you could do tshuva. So why is it that echta ve'eshrev, I'll sin? Because, I can fix it later. I can do tshuva. Why doesn't that work? Why not? One reason is I can keep on sinning. I'll do tshuva Thursday. I'll keep going. It snowballs. I'll have one potato chip. I'll go on the treadmill. I have two potato chips. I'll go longer on the treadmill. That excuse keeps on going and going and going. And again, ordinarily, the tshuva itself is the product of the person's sense of disconnect, even shame, whatever it is, from the Avera. The person does it, and then they have regret. You recall way back when that the Alter Rebbe said, unless the guy's a psychopath, and we did talk about that, the Rasha Be'emes, a person, even the wicked person, the Rashoyim Maleim Charotos, the wicked are filled with regret. There's constant and endless regret. But if I think that it's okay that I did the Avera, because I'm going to do tshuva next week, and it's okay that I did this bad thing because I'm going to buy you a Porsche, then I have no regret. I have blocked that intuitive sense of regret because I've already excused myself because tomorrow I'm going to fix it. So it's unlikely that I'll do tshuva. Not only will I keep sinning, I'll keep on pushing it down the road and kicking it down the road. And as long as I can keep swiping my American Express card, I'll figure it out somewhere down the road. Well, the same thing or a similar characteristic is ordinarily tshuva is in part spurred by the regret. But here I've given myself license. I don't have regret because I convince myself that it's okay because I'm going to fix it. And again, it's still recoverable from, but it's really, really hard. And yet, the person is not going to use that as an excuse. Again, it's not going to use it as an excuse. So why should he use it as an excuse to, again, fill in the blank, whatever his indulgence is? So the Alter Rebbe says, Va'afal PK, nevertheless, Kol Ish Yisrael. Now here we see, it's the precision of the Alter Rebbe. Here it doesn't say Adam, it says Ish. And remember, there are four basic terms that all translate as human beings. Adam, Enosh, Ish, Gever. Ish is about the person who, and again, we use the word emotional, but not like emotional, like, oh, he's so excited or he's so weepy. We mean he just acts out of his impulse. If he was Adam, if he was acting like an Adam, he wouldn't have done the Avera. Because Adam is the Aleph over the biology. Adam is that I engage my intellect, and that coordinates and calibrates and matures my character. Here, the Alter Rebbe says, and this is the distinctive point, Ish Yisroel. He's still Yisroel. I mean, he still has his neshama. You can't forfeit that. But he's only acted like an Ish. And Ish is essentially the next step up in the biological evolutionary process. But he's not engaged as Adam. He hasn't been Adam. He's only been Ish. And that's why he sinned. What we think. I wasn't thinking. That's why I did it. If he would have been thinking clearly, he wouldn't have done it. So every time we hear about some bazillionaire or celebrity doing something so incredibly foolish, because they're not being Adam, not because they didn't do well in law school, not because they don't have a high board score, but because in the moment they're not engaging with their head. They're engaging with their impulse. Muchan u'mezumin limsor nafshay. Nevertheless, even he is ready and prepared. He is ready to go, God forbid, if it happened, to give up his life. Even if he's a total impulsive person who never thinks twice before he does anything, he's just a total go for it, whatever I feel like I'm doing, even if that's his life model. The bottom line is, so to speak, or the basic point is, he is ready to surrender his very life, limsra nafshal kedushas Hashem, not to even pretend, even to bow down to idolatry. Afil lefisha, even just to do it for a minute. Well, his tshuva, and he'll do tshuva, and his tshuva can be accepted. He'll do tshuva, and it'll be accepted. But still, he will absolutely resist it. Again, even if he's a person who acts purely out of impulse, even if he's a person who doesn't have any logical awareness, he doesn't have any training, he simply acts out of impulse. When he gets that kind of clarity, he would give up his life rather than deny his relationship with Hashem. Even to pretend, and I'll do tshuva, and it'll be accepted. It'll be a proper tshuva, and Hashem will accept that tshuva. V'hainu, why? Why not? Because he has this light of Hashem that we spoke about before. Remember, we asked the basic question, how is it fair to expect anybody to ever do a mitzvah? We have a Nefesh Elokis, and we have a Nefesh Bahamas. And as the Alter Rebbe explains in the first few chapters of Tanya, they each have the same equipment. You remember the chess analogy. Both teams have the same chess pieces, and those pieces have the same mobility and flexibility. And if I look at a chessboard, I have no way of knowing who's going to win. There's no way of knowing who's going to win. Neither one of them, it's not like an army where you have a mighty army and a tiny army, like the story of Hanukkah, where it's going to take a miracle. Here in the story of chess, they're both equally the same. And to double down on it, the animal soul gets a head start. Because from the moment I'm born, I'm aware of one thing. I'm here. I'm here. I'm hungry. I want. I'm here. I want. And maturity, and this is what it means to be bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah, it means now at 12, 13, I also get awareness of something other than myself. I also get awareness that there's something more than my existence. But meanwhile, my animating soul not only has a head start, but I have to take care of it because I have to eat and I have to sleep and and the whole world is constantly and continuously stimulating my humanity. Madison Avenue was spending bazillions of dollars to get me not to think about it, to just get me to do it, to just indulge myself. And it's constantly, and I get hungry and I got to feed. So how is my poor godly soul ever going to win? Well, he's got another ally. What's his ally? The Or Hashem, the infinity of Hashem. Well, if he's got that, how does he ever lose? Well, unfortunately, he does have to do one thing. He's got to let it in. He's got to let it in. Dr. Waldorf Oliver Shalom used to say, 99% is done by Hashem. What do? You just have to know that it's Hashem that's doing it. You have to have that awareness. So that's what we have to do. We have to let the infinity of Hashem into our existence. So we have the ultimate weapon that cannot be defeated. There's no taiva that can stand up. No thing can stand up against the nothing of Hashem. How? Why? Because the Or Hashem. But it's got to be allowed in. That's the Or Hashem. That is the crucial phrase. Hamalubish benafshem kanal. That is invested within the neshama, but it gets forgotten, but it can be rediscovered. That's not only on Yom Kippur, only on Tuesday, only when I'm doing Jewish things, etc. It is there, literally, it's my identity. It's not something that I incorporate into my identity. It is who I truly am. It is higher than time, that is, it's not subject to time, and it is the authority and dominant. It has that power because every action of association with Hashem is higher than time. Every mitzvah is eternal. So I know that this donut is pleasurable for a few minutes. And as the Alter Rebbe reminded us a few chapters ago, we all know that in 2 hours from now I have a stomach ache from it. But every mitzvah is an eternal mitzvah. So eternal versus momentary, eternal is going to win. But what happens? I get so consumed with what's staring me in the face. And again, Hashem overrules time. We live in a world of time. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. But the Havaya, the four-letter name of Hashem, is past, present, and future all at the same time. So right now, I think I have to have this right in the moment. But if I have this awareness of the infinity of Hashem, like Yosef, who imagined his father's face, not just, oh, my father would make me feel bad, or that's a killjoy, but it's the idea that I exist outside of this moment. I come from something and I have something to go forward with. That will give him the strength to overcome this taiva, no matter how delicious it might be at the moment.